Hi, and welcome to another episode of Astrologers Chatting Over Coffee. And we're Ralph and Lahni D'Amicis, and we love our Starbucks. And we thought, how can we do a series called Astrologers Chatting Over Coffee without doing one that really centered on coffee? So it's very interesting, looking at people in the news and things like that, how a lot of people know who Howard Schultz is,
Right.
but never knew who he was before. And we thought it'd be interesting to look at his chart and to look at the chart of the inception of Starbucks and kind of give you our musings about what we find interesting about that.
Because a founder of a company is, of course, an important figure, but the company develops a life of its own. So it's also about how was the company formed, what was the period of time when it was formed, what was that moment, and then what was its fate from then on.
It's kind of like a birth chart.
Exactly.
Howard Schultz gave birth to Starbucks, although he was not the first owner of the company called Starbucks.
Right.
He actually worked for two gentlemen who owned the Starbucks name. And as a lot of things evolved, and we'll probably talk about some of them, we will explore some of the reasons why he was able to buy the name for the company. I mean, he really did things while he was an employee to bring Starbucks to a different place because they were just roasters.
Right.
They didn't sell any coffee or have coffee shops at all. They were roasters of coffee beans. And he actually traveled around and, in search of good beans and ideas and things like that. So it was really kind of an interesting job that he had.
People underestimate how important coffee is in the world. After oil, it is the second most traded commodity. So it's a very important part. And in truth, where we live, we have actually a number of different private coffee shops as well. And we also have the Pete's nearby. But right where we live, there's 6 different Starbucks within about a mile of us. So that tends to be where we go. And we do like their coffee. So we figured, why not talk about it? And you have to realize, too, that in big businesses, this is how astrologers who do work with finances and work with the stock market, what they do is look at the founding chart for that organization. Because usually on a big organization, there's a lot of people involved. There's, might be a pair of partners, might be 3 or 4 partners. There's the board later on. But the company has a life of its own based upon its moment. And the moment of the chart for Starbucks on their website, what they say is March 31st, 1971 in Seattle, Washington. And traditionally, businesses are set for 12 noon because that way everything's out in the open. Now, in reality, in doing a little research, the first store opened about 5 or 6 days later in the very last degree of Pisces at 9 in the morning. But they get to say what their time is. And so we're going with the time that they're saying.
Well, but I kind of like that Pisces imagery because isn't their symbol the mermaid?
That's true.
So it's kind of, interesting that was the first store opening.
Well, coincidentally, I happen to have on the other side of the page, I have the original founding. So which is one of the reasons why I did it that way. So we'd have both of them. And it is interesting. Great point that their symbol is, after all, the mermaid.
Exactly.
And it's at
29 degrees and how many minutes?
33.
And 33 degrees
Pisces.
of Pisces.
This is why I call her my Countessa, because she is the numbers girl.
I wake up thinking about numbers. I go to sleep thinking about numbers. I count mostly all day long. It's a sickness.
Well, I obviously think about mermaids.
But we're not analyzing my chart right now. We're analyzing the chart of both Howard Schultz and Starbucks. Now, interestingly, if the inception was in Pisces, he's born in another water sign. The birth data for any of you astrologers out there, we don't have a birth time. We could do a little quick rectification, although with noontime, he's got Saturn rising, and there is a Saturnine quality to him when you first meet him, and so somewhere around that time, looks like it could be a good possibility anyway. But his birth data is July 19th, 1953 in Brooklyn. So, as I said, we're using the 12 noon time, but he has Sun in Cancer, and he has Mars in Cancer, pretty closely conjunct, 3 degrees away. So, like a lot of his energy is tied into that sort of nurturing, feeding
feeding
people
people.
energy that Cancer has. And of course, Cancer is another sea image and a
Yes.
water sign, so we've got this synergy between, the mermaid and Pisces and Cancer, the crab, and
And you also have 120 degrees, or just a little over 120 degrees, a trine between his sun and the sun of Starbucks at 29 degrees. And what's interesting is when something is in the last degree of a sign, it throws a lot of its energy into the next sign, so into Aries, into that next springtime. But you really see the dynamic between his supportive Cancerian sun, and Cancerians are great salespeople. And he has Mars there as well, as a person who would sell this concept.
but he also has Uranus conjunct, loose, a little bit looser, but conjunct that Mars. And so Uranus, especially in the modern interpretation, gives you kind of a global ethic, like a more wide-ranging area of interest. And isn't he the one who is concerned about a global community and issues of equality, kind of the rebel of, making sure that people have what they need. And of course, this global sort of feeding also goes into that Cancerian type of energy
And
that
also-
is so strong in his chart.
And also that Uranus there conjunct his Mars, he was the person who was working for these folks and kept saying to him, you got to do it differently. You got to do it differently, and finally took the company into a different direction once you gained control of it. And Uranus is also a planet that's about community. And so one thing he really wanted to do is create a place where the community could come together.
It's funny because he's got Mercury and Pluto both in Leo. And the Mercury's retrograde. And he really had a lot of ideas in the beginning for this other company that was also called Starbucks. And he really felt very strongly about them. I mean, if there's something that you can say about him is that he feels very strongly about issues. And so he actually left the company because they wouldn't implement any of his thing, and started another company, started his own company. And it wasn't until a little while later that they came back to him and said, okay, we'll sell you the company after all. But it's a very interesting story. And if you want to know more about it, he's written 2 books, one called Pour Your Heart Into It, and the second one is called Onward. And it's fascinating to know the stories behind things. It helps to enhance your experience of going to Starbucks, but beyond that, it helps you just to understand companies and what companies' ethics are. I mean, isn't his company one who wants to make sure that people get a chance to go to college and have
Well,
good pay and
No.
all these other kinds of things. So.
not surprising. Jupiter is in Sagittarius in his in Starbucks chart. Jupiter in Sagittarius is the ruling position. It's probably the position more than any other position that really promotes higher education. He was the first person in his family to ever go to college. But Jupiter in Sagittarius is also, it's optimistic, it's expansionistic, it's visionary, and it's within 3 degrees of Neptune. And when you combine those two together, that is a combination in which you find very successful people when those planets are involved. Partially because Neptune has to do with having the imagination to see this, the vision.
Right. And then Jupiter has the gregariousness, the optimism, I mean, you need to be optimistic to try to innovate, because you're going to fall on your face a few times for sure, but to be the perennial optimist is very important. And it's interesting that as we're talking about this, I think it's important to explain to the viewer that, we get one sort of set of information from looking at Howard's chart. What was his motivation? But it's kind of like looking at the dad's chart and then looking at the teen's chart or the child's chart.
Right.
The child then developed a life of its own. And, each one of these charts went their own paths and had their own transits and things like that. And you get to see the evolution of Starbucks as a company, with or without Howard Schultz. He's not, the he stepped back from the CEO position, and so Starbucks is a living, breathing entity of its own without Daddy holding his hand.
Right. It's interesting that he has Mars in Cancer, which is not a strong position in what's called the dignities. It tells you whether or not a planet is very extrovert or very introvert. It's actually a very introvert position for Mars. It's kind of the person who, rather than walking up to you and shaking hands with you, will kind of stand next to you in line and chat about stuff. They're much more nudgy. Oh, I bought that last week. It was great. It's a helpful position. And then Starbucks itself has Mars in Capricorn. Now, Mars in Capricorn is a very dignified position. It's actually the polarity of Mars in Cancer. They're opposite each other, those two signs in the zodiac. So it's a position that tends to really thrive through hard work. And what's interesting, you typically think of Mars in Capricorn as being dark and serious, which pretty much describes coffee. I mean, Mars in Capricorn, that's the coffee bean right there, isn't it? That's the image of the coffee bean right there. And it looks like in the chart, it's Mars in Cancer conjunct the moon.
Or at least the moon is in the same sign.
In the same sign. Well, the moon in Capricorn is actually it's another detriment position. It's opposite the ruler in Cancer. So it is about being there for people. There's a certain formality that comes into Starbucks. When you walk in, I mean, they're friendly, but they don't come out from their side of the counter. It is a business. You're here for a formal relationship.
Well, what I found interesting when I first read his first book was, about how, he wanted to change, how he learned about the changes he suggested to the initial owner. And the fact is that he was on a trip to Milan and he found a coffee bar, an espresso bar. It was the first time he had seen that sort of a situation because we didn't have that here. They were coffee roasters. There wasn't really a place where you could go and hang out and even have a cup of coffee with a coworker on your way to work or anything like that. But the Milanese, they drank it standing up at a coffee bar.
Right, yes.
Just a quick one, chat with people a little bit. They knew everybody. The barista knew everybody, and they exchanged a few little pleasantries, and it was a very kind of a social thing. And the kind of drinks that they had, the cappuccino, or a latte or something. I mean, these were things that sort of weren't, we take them for granted now, but they weren't really very common for people to drink. I mean, I think that people in Italy think it's funny that we drink cappuccinos in the afternoon. I mean, they're meant for the morning in Italy, but
they think we're funny about a lot of ways.
Exactly.
So it's okay.
But so he had this whole world view, and I think that a lot of that had to do with in his natal chart he has Venus conjunct Jupiter in Gemini, and if we have the rising right, it's elevated in the 9th house, so that's traveling and expanding yourself and making personal friendships is Gemini, and Venus is personable and it's the kind of person that you want to chat with. And he kept going back to Milan and, just wanted to bring that feeling to other people. And it evolved into, the more Cancerian aspect of creating a home away from home from people. And you only have to go into one of the 9,000 Starbucks in Napa to find that people really treat it like a home away from home, because go try to plug in your computer. Everybody's sitting at a table with their computer and they've been parked there all day.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, another interesting astrological point is his Jupiter in Gemini is opposite Starbucks Jupiter in Sagittarius. They're pairs of each other. They reflect each other. His Mercury natally is in Leo. Or I'm sorry, Starbucks is natally in Leo. His Mercury Starbucks is in Aries. His is in Leo. Once again, you have the trine setting up. You have all these very supportive trines, but Jupiter is one of these planets that really likes to be challenged. And in fact, if you take the two ruling signs of Jupiter, which are Sagittarius and Pisces, their traditional rulers, they're 90 degrees from each other. Okay?
Which is a square.
Exactly. So having the Jupiters opposite each other, they're challenging each other. the concept of this business, of what this business was going to do, was a challenge to him. He could see the whole other side of the coin. He could see all of its possibilities because his Jupiter was all the way on the far side. And because his Jupiter is conjunct his Venus, he loved it. He loved the idea of doing this. This was part of his passion. This wasn't something he did because, oh, there's going to be a lot of money in it. The Venus likes money. He liked the exchange of it. The thing about Jupiter and Venus and Gemini is Gemini likes business, but because they like the conversation. They want the exchange. They want the exchange of information. It's the little kid who has a ball, baseball, and the other one has a mitt and a bat and says, hey, we should do something together,
It's true what you say. You really get the sense when you read the book, and not that I get any kind of commission for selling the book, but it's really, I like to read fascinating business stories. There's another book, I can't think of the title offhand, but it's about the people who started,
I'll speak of the English.
the animation company.
Oh, Pixar.
Yes. And that was a fascinating story, and you get a lot of ideas and insights about running your own business or running any business, or just insights about the people or ways to work with coworkers or employees. It's just a fascinating way to look and see how other people do things or what things occurred to other people and how you can apply that in your own life. So I find them very fascinating.
Well, there's some interesting points here. For instance, with Starbucks, based upon the initial chart, which I really like this 29-degree Pisces sign because
I like that chart
many
too.
times companies that get very big are founded in Virgo or Pisces. Those two really seem to go. Like Sears, for instance, was Sears and General Motors were both Virgo companies. Its polarity is Pisces. Once again, it's the ability to envision a big concept. It really works for them. I think it's because a lot of people's imagination can work with it.
Well, and it's interesting because, a company that started in Virgo is really focused on, or seems that it would be focused on the worker and the day-to-day work, the nuts
Being
and
of service.
bolts, and being of service. And, where the companies that are born in Pisces are more sort of the vision of the creator. That's the visionary. And they don't have to be as hands-on, whereas a Virgo company requires, if not the founder, then a lot of people to be a lot hands-on with the details of everything.
But what's interesting is that the planet that's immediately ahead of a person's sun is called your leading planet. Has a lot to do with how you encounter people. So, for instance, with Howard, the planet that's actually in front of his sun is his Mars. It's very, very close. It's Mars and Uranus. Now, people don't tend to see how Uranus acts in your chart because you can't see Uranus without a telescope. So people don't tend to react to the planets that they can't see with the naked eye. It's just a kind of a strange function of that. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all like that.
Not that strange, pretty logical.
Very logical. But Mars, they see, and so people kind of get a real strong sense of his physicality, his martialness, but it's in Cancer, which is the one that says, oh, how you doing? It's a very caring, but aggressively caring position. Now, Starbucks is different.
Well, demonstrative.
Demonstrative.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think aggressively caring. That's
Passionate.
nice. How you doing? Which is something you like to hear from people. People appreciate when someone cares about you. The planet leading this chart from March 20th is Venus, which is very charming. It's an Aquarius, though. Venus and Aquarius.
The group thing.
The group thing. It's the shepherdess. It's the one who says, how are you all doing? And wants to make sure that no sheep go wandering away.
Is everybody happy?
Yeah.
Does do you fit into this little community?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you really see that. Now the other chart, the one that they're claiming, which is the March 31st, it puts the Sun in Aries. It puts the Mercury in Aries as well. It moves the Venus into Pisces. I'm not sure if I see that as much. It also puts the Sun right at Chiron. And I'm not sure if I see that as much. I really see that initial chart.
Here's the thing. This chart, the March 31st chart, is the formalization, but the birth.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like the 20th was the opening of the first store.
Yeah.
You know, just because you had the baby christened on the 31st doesn't
Right.
mean the baby wasn't born on the 20th.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you got the bags under your eyes to prove it.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So I'm definitely stronger with the March 20th chart.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and also it's got the moon in Capricorn as compared to like the moon in Cancer. And I really see more the moon in Capricorn, and I mean the fact that every single one is similar. Every Starbucks is very similar. I mean, if you go to your little local coffee shop,
Not only that, isn't it Saturnian in a way?
yeah.
There's the browns and
Yeah.
I mean, it's part of the coffee decor, but it's
Yeah.
also a little bit masculine.
Yeah.
That's something that actually he's
Saturnian.
talked about, or the company has talked about. You know, bringing in round tables and some features that were inviting to a more feminine energy, because a lot of the structures and things are very angular, which to someone from a feng shui perspective
Right.
is masculine.
Well,
So-
look at the initial chart. The initial chart, other than the sun at the very, very, very last degree in minutes of Pisces, and it's the only planet in Pisces, the whole chart is masculine. You've got Mercury in Aries, a very masculine sign. You got, well, Saturn's in Taurus. That's
That's a feminine,
that's
but it's a masculine planet
exactly.
in a feminine sign.
You have Venus in Aquarius, once again masculine. You have Neptune and Sagittarius, both in Sagittarius fire signs.
Neptune and Jupiter.
Oh, it's Neptune and Jupiter, culpa. And then you have Uranus and Libra, so it's a lot of that. Now, the moon in Capricorn, the moon and Mars together in Capricorn is feminine, but it's the most structured of the feminine signs.
Of the feminine signs.
You know, and the Saturn, once again, is the most structured planet in a feminine sign. So it is very structured femininity. What's interesting is this Saturn in Taurus, it's a Venus-ruled sign, Taurus. Howard has Saturn in Libra, the other Venus-ruled sign, Libra, conjunct Neptune. That conjunction between the Saturn and Neptune was a really interesting generation. It basically started about 1951, went on to about through 53, into late 53. And it's a group of people who have a very strong sense of justice, a very strong need to work in partnership. I remember years ago Rob Hans saying he thought that Saturn and Libra was actually the strongest of the three extrovert positions, Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn in Libra, because of its ability to work cooperatively or aggressively want to work cooperatively. It has to do with the fact that Saturn in Libra loves to create situations where people can cooperate and feel good about it. In other words, they're going to feel like the efforts I put into it, I'm going to be rewarded, in that proportion. I'm not going to be stolen from, I'm not going to be cheated. The fact that Neptune's there, and in his case it's conjunct, 21 degrees, it's infused in his spiritual matrix, this need to work in partnership. And so one part of his genius had to do with his ability to, once again, create these partnerships. Because, putting this together, you have to work in cooperation. And that at 21 degrees, it's trine. It's a really supportive relationship with the Jupiter and the Venus and the Juno, but we won't go into the asteroids here. But it's also forming an aspect to the Pluto. So partnerships that affect big situations, grand situations, global situations. It's really interesting how, he was so much a part of his generation in that. He was like the expression of that.
Well, and now we've got by transit, we've got Pluto in Capricorn.
Oh, yes.
And so the Capricorn in both of these charts are taking sort of evolutionary transformations.
Saturn and Capricorn right now. We just had, yesterday, the day we had the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, in which all the astrologers were posting things about, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? It was there last week too. It just wasn't exactly conjunct. Saturn likes Capricorn. Saturn's ruling feminine sign is Capricorn. It means about, are you acting like an adult? Are you acting in a structured way? Are you working in a way that is planning for the future? The thing is that most of us don't want to do that. most of us want to go to lunch. Most of us want to go have cake. We want to think very short term, and Saturn's all about long term. And the reason we've always thought that is because Saturn takes 28 years to go around the sun, to go through all 12 signs. Back before we knew about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, it was the furthest planet that we could see, so it was the longest timeline. The next shortest timeline is Jupiter, 12 years. Well, 12 years, that's an easy, when 12 is when you kind of become part of your society. But 28, you can't say you're not an adult at 28. And then years ago, many people used to not make it far past 28, so it was really seen as adulthood. It's also, the body goes through physiological changes around age 28 with the changes in minerals in the body, and people get stiffer and more structured. So Saturn in Capricorn, it's a very strong position. The fact it's conjunct Pluto, which is this global outlook, means that we are all having to be reminded to act like adults in a global way. Well, isn't that global warming, global climate changes? That we all have to look at this because we have melting going on. We have to look at this politically in terms of how are people taking over control of various governments around the world, the strongmen around the world. We're all looking at this and saying, wait a second. We feel the pressure of this. How much are we willing to act like adults and push back against it? And of course, because with this Capricorn, Mars and Moon and Vesta and Starbucks chart, they're feeling it. It's affecting them somehow. It would be interesting to kind of look inside their company books and see how it's affecting them.
Well, not just their books, but their board meetings where they see the dynamics of the future of where Starbucks is going. I mean, a little bit more public is the politicalization of Howard Schultz's views. And he's got this Pluto transit and Saturn transit going over his Chiron, which we said we wouldn't go too deeply into the asteroids, but Chiron is kind of the wounded healer. And the way that you learn your lessons from your wounding is by going and teaching them or straightening them out. And it may well be part of the impetus that he feels now to at least consider throwing his hat into the ring for presidential run. I suspect that if he doesn't run, he will become activated somehow in that regard because he's got a very strong sense of responsibility. So
it's interesting. The politics is so different from business.
Well, in the Mars in Cancer, I mean, the United States is a Cancerian country.
Yeah.
We're founded on 4th of July is the, so a company founded in Cancer. I'm not saying that other people born in other signs are not, don't love their country or feel a strong connection to the country, but, you certainly see somebody who has their Mars there and this transit from Capricorn opposing it would really feel strongly about it.
Right, and there's been many very important Cancerians in the American culture. So, wrapping up.
This is a little different than what we used to talk about. We're hoping that people will find these little journeys with coffee interesting, and we hope you come back and see us next time.